Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club, and it's finally, after many months, time to finish my Rocketarium Gadfly build here. Um, so far, basically everything's done except for a couple little tiny things to do. I clear coated it, so yeah, the decals are protected. You really can't read them, honestly, unless you get really close, which is kind of unfortunate, but I guess there isn't a lot of detail that needed to be added, so whatever. So in any event, a couple things that need to be done. One is we need to deal with the retention system. So there it is. If you recall, we've got both a Kevlar string in there and the elastic shock cord, both of which are nice. It's nice to have both. The Kevlar is more durable, um, but it does tend to be a little rough on ejection from time to time. Parachute is surprisingly big for a little rocket because remember the nose cone, my goodness, is it heavy. There is a whole lot of weight in it. Now you certainly can just gather this up and tie it through the nose, but I have my usual approach here. I'm going to grab one of these barrel swivels. I like these because if for no other reason, it's really easy to hot swap out parachutes should you be out for a day on the rocket flying range and you burn a hole through one. Well, you can always just unclip and swap in a new one. So I'm going to gather up the strands here, like so. Oops, there we go. I'm going to try to get them kind of centered before I do this. So parachute's going off for a moment. The way that this one is built, I should show you here quickly, I guess, before going into this. All these, the shroud lines, none of them go across the. Oh, my mistake. One of them does go across the middle. Well, never mind. Most of the time, these Rocketarium ones, they just have the anchor points are right next to each other. Well, that's good. These are how the Estes ones are made. They're a little bit harder to make because the length of the thread is different because the one in the middle has to be a bit longer, which is, I suspect, why they do it this way. But it is nice to have the one that goes the whole way across. It means there should be less tangles. Anyway, I've gathered them up. They go through the eyelet of the swivel, open the swivel back up, push it up through, and then just pull it tight, and there you go. All knotted and everything. All right, so hopefully that's kind of centered. If not, you can always kind of loosen it up as necessary. Yeah, because I didn't do the world's greatest job in centering this, apparently. So let's try to pull on these a little bit. Should do. All right. Anyway, so that's taken care of. I probably should have checked beforehand, but this is a very thick bit of plastic. It is entirely possible that I'm going to have to go to a bigger swivel. It would also not be the world's worst idea anyway. There we go. Because these are rated by weight, and the nose, as mentioned, is pretty heavy. I think this one's just barely going to fit. It is actually going to be a little bit difficult to reclasp, but there we go. Not that bad. All right, so that's in, and then I need to tie the shock cord in. And I'm just going to do a bunch of overhand knots, probably like 3, maybe 4. Here we go. The idea, of course, is this really needs to be secure. You don't need anything fancy to make this knot secure. You just need to have a few lines of defense here. So I can do one more. That was 3. Here's 4. Good enough. And then I'm going to trim off the bit of excess here. Because if you don't trim off the excess, you could end up with it being a little hard to get into the tube. You don't need to, of course. It's not that big a deal. I did, by the way, wait until doing this, or to do this, until I was absolutely done with all the paint, because I don't need to have to worry about getting paint on any of this stuff because paint's not good for the elastic. There we go. I'm just going to do a quick cursory pack here. This is obviously when it's time to fly. Then I will repack it in earnest. But this is just good for now. There we go. Should say, because we have that baffle in here, the whole thing needs to fit in here, which is not a lot of space. So the half fold I did might be a little tight. I typically do a Z fold, which is folding into thirds, basically shaped like a Z. That would pack better. All right, so that's taken care of. The one thing I did want to show you too is options for retaining the engines. So if you recall back ages ago when we built the retention or the motor mount here, there are no hooks, there's no screw-on retainer, there's nothing. So the reason, of course, is if you look at it, there's no room there, right? You could probably get hooks in if you put them sideways, just kind of staggered a bit, but that's not going to be particularly easy. I have seen people, and this is pretty ingenious, I have to say. What they do is, again, going back to this, they get a screw and they mount it in this gap between the three motors, or however many motors there are, and like epoxy it in place. And so the screw comes out a little bit past the end. They get a washer and a bolt then, like a wing nut or something like that, and they put the motors in, and then they put the washer on top and tighten up the bolt, and that'll hold it in place. That's ingenious, frankly. This is a really small hole, though, I have to say, in this particular mount. I looked around to see if I happen to have any screws that would fit in here nicely, and I don't. I'd have to actually go to the hardware store and look for something specific. If it's something you want to try, more power to you. It's pretty ingenious, and it's going to hold the motors. That being said, though, I think it's kind of overkill for this particular design. So here I have just these dummy ones, right? That's engine spacers. So they're going to fit in. When you actually load the motors in, they're going to fit in like this, right? And as I was saying, if you were to use the washer, right, it would fit right on top of these, and it would tighten up right at the back, and the motors would burn, and everything would be great. You don't really need to go that route. All you really need to do is have some tape holding these things in. So that's actually a little easier said than done, honestly. You could certainly tape around, probably the whole way around. Be careful because you have a decal right here. You don't want to get the tape on the decal. Even if you did clear coat it, you could certainly mess it up that way. But you just need a little bit of masking tape to glue or to tape between either the main rocket body or interior. Again, move this around. So like in between this part and in the interior, you could probably end up putting a decent sized piece of masking tape like right here in this gap that would hold two of them on, and you'd do it 3 times. And you think, oh, well, a piece of masking tape, that's not going to do anything. These are rockets, right? They put out a decent amount of kick. You'd be surprised. Masking tape, I've never had the masking tape fail to hold a motor in if you tape it from the motor to the rocket itself. The other thing you probably can and probably should do is put a ring of tape around one of the ends of it just to friction fit it in. So this is actually a pretty snug fit going in, but it's not enough. It slides pretty easily. That's not going to be enough to just hold the motor in. Friction fitting it with a piece of tape might work. I have not had a lot of success with that, honestly. It sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. And the real danger, of course, well, there are 2 things. One is when the ejection charge kicks off, and if nothing's holding it, it's just going to do this because it's going to kick the motor out. That's the least massive thing. That's what's going to go flying. Or it might pop it out halfway, so half the ejection charge is blowing the motors out, which only leaves half the ejection charge to push the parachute out, which is a problem. If it goes flying out the whole way, you got nothing kicking the parachute out. If it goes halfway, maybe that's enough. Maybe between all three, it's enough. But really, you do want to have some kind of like positive retention here, be it tape or the fancy screw adapter system if you're really feeling gutsy. Maybe you are at this point. I don't know. Regardless, you do need something. I'm just going to stick with tape because 3 pieces of masking tape ought to do the job without much trouble here. All right. So that takes care of this build. I don't know when I'm going to fly this. Hopefully at some point. Oh, and once you have everything wired together, yeah, that's a whole nother thing. I have the Estes Pro Series launcher, a launch control system, which I use when I launch by myself. That works pretty nicely because it has 2 leads in it. Yeah, let me grab that actually. There we go. Just off camera. So it has 2 sets of leads. This is it all wrapped up. Like this. So you can clip up 2 motors just fine. That's not an issue. This has got 3. So what you end up doing is you wire up 1 motor, and then the other motor, you take the igniter and you kind of like braid the 2 nearest parts of it together. So it doesn't really matter which is which, right? You just position the igniters back here so that 2 of them, you can braid each of the wires. So you got 2 sets of wires like this, and then you clamp, and then you clamp. That's not bad. If you have this, right, if it already has 2 leads in it. If you don't have that, well, things get significantly more complicated. You can try to braid all 3 together, but that's not easy to do because they just don't line up very well. You could easily do it in series, I guess, but that's not going to work because your circuit's going to fail as soon as the first motor lights. So that's not an option. The other thing you can do is buy what's called, colloquially anyway, a clip whip. And that's basically just some wire that splits off into multiple leads. You could make it yourself if you really wanted to. You just need some electrical wire and some alligator clips. So you could certainly build that yourself. You could certainly look around. Probably you'd have to specialize down to a rocketry supply company, and not all of them seem to carry clip whips. I think because most people just make them themselves, or because clustering isn't all that popular, I guess. But regardless, yeah, the launching is a little bit more complicated, and you can certainly go into the instructions and they say some stuff about how to do it. And they do make some pretty serious recommendations about what kind of launching system you should use, because just like the 9-volt powered Estes kit launcher that comes with the starter packs is not going to do the trick. It's not powerful enough. So in any event, that takes care of this build. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in whatever comes next.